A midnight quarrel in the snow-blanketed home in Snow Ridge turned into tragedy when the pregnant wife collapsed onto the cold stone floor. Just minutes later, the baby she had cherished day by day left her forever. In the most painful moment of her life, Emily looked up and saw the man who had once vowed to love her standing there, his eyes colder than the Colorado mountain winds. He thought she would stay silent. He believed he could erase every trace before anyone discovered his dark secret. But he was wrong. The battle ahead would expose sins that would leave the entire courtroom breathless. Bitter winds slithered through the snow-covered rooftops of Snow Ridge, drawing out thin howls like knife blades scraping against window panes. Inside the luxurious log cabin isolated on the mountainside, golden lamplight cast long, cold shadows, no different from the shallow breaths of a house quietly witnessing the tragedy about to unfold. Emily placed her hand on her belly, feeling irregular contractions run down her spine like warning pulses. Her body felt heavy, exhausted. But what tightened her heart more than anything was the prolonged absence of Nathan, her husband. Outside, the snow began to fall thicker. Emily shuffled slowly to the window, gazing down the winding road leading to the house. Each snowflake that fell made her feel closer to something ominous, as if the night was trying to hide a truth she hadn't yet named. She tried to breathe deeply, but the cold air blasting into her lungs made her shiver. The pains were uneven, sometimes dull throbs, sometimes like being squeezed from within. And before continuing with the main content of the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video, okay? Oh, and don't forget to comment below to let us know where you're watching us from. We're thrilled to hear that. Then the sound of tires crunching on the snow rang out. A sharp, hurried noise, as if the car had just stopped in haste. Emily turned toward the hallway, one hand gripping the wall for balance as a new pain surged. The door burst open. A rush of cold air flooded in along with the smell of alcohol and unfamiliar cologne too strong, too alien to belong to Nathan. His dark coat was dusted with snow. There was no hurry or worry in his stride, only irritation, barely masked behind a nonchalant expression. Emily stood a few steps away, clearly seeing the distance emerging on every line of her husband's face. She parted her lips to speak, but a sudden contraction doubled her over, her hand clutching the edge of the table. Nathan glanced over, but his eyes lingered only a moment before drifting away, as if the sight meant nothing. Emily struggled to straighten up, her breath coming in gasps. Her hand reached out instinctively, brushing lightly against Nathan's wrist as he passed by. That moment passed with ruthless speed. Nathan jerked his arm away sharply, the motion crisp like brushing off a stray hair from one's shirt. But for Emily, that yank was enough to throw her off balance. The icy wooden floor met her back in a heavy thud. Her breath burst out, mingling with the low whine of the wind outside. Everything spun. Faint sparkles slid across her vision. The pain radiated from her abdomen to her hips, then through her body like a silent fire. Nathan stood motionless beside her, his eyes darkening not with panic, but with fear of being threatened by something else, something unrelated to her. As Emily tried to lift herself, her feet slipped, her hands trembled, seeking purchase. In that instant, she caught sight in the mirror behind Nathan, his face, cold, empty, and full of calculation. Outside, the snow fell heavier. And inside, Emily began to realize that the tragedy of this night was no accident at all, but the starting point of something far darker bearing down on her. All right, dear viewers of mine, if you're watching and find this story intriguing, please comment the number 1, or comment, "I'm still here," to keep listening, okay? The stark white light of the recovery room washed over Emily's face, making her eyes sink even deeper into hollows. She awoke to the indifferent silence of hospital walls, a dull ache spreading across her abdomen like an echo of last night's moment with every breath. There were no familiar footsteps, no hand clasping hers, only the steady, heartless beep of the monitor, precise and programmed, as if it were designed to witness the pain of those who suffered in quiet. Emily lay still, her eyes fixed on the pale streaks of light on the ceiling. A part of her clung to the fragile hope that Nathan was standing somewhere in the hallway, or asking the doctor for updates. But the silence stretched so long that she understood that hope was too fragile to survive. The door to the room opened. Nathan entered, bringing neither warmth nor sorrow. His suit was ironed to perfection, his hair combed neatly, Tie nodded impeccably as if he were heading to a meeting rather than visiting the wife who had just lost their child. His gaze skimmed over her so quickly that no emotion could be detected. Emily wanted to say something, but her voice caught in her parched throat. Nathan placed a leather folder on her lap. The motion was gentle, but heavier than any pain she had ever endured. When she looked down, the bold printed words struck her eyes. Divorce papers. The air in the room seemed to halt. There was no lengthy explanation, no hesitation, no crack in his expression. Nathan stood tall, as if he were doing the most reasonable thing in his life, and Emily was merely a chapter to be neatly closed. She felt her heart constrict. The dull ache turned into something sharper as she realized he had prepared everything in advance before that tragic night, before the fall, before she lay motionless in blood and fear. Emily tried to sit up. Every movement was a struggle against frailty. She felt the blood still warm against the gauze beneath her. But what made her tremble was not the physical wound, but the way Nathan looked at her like she was a problem to be handled, nothing more. As he left the room, the air grew thick. Emily stared at the folder on her lap, her hand shaking as it touched the edge of the paper. Each word evoked an invisible cut. Outside the window, the aspen sky was thick and gray, heavy clouds carrying a warning. The phone on the bedside table buzzed, startling Emily. A message from an acquaintance. "Are you okay? Heard you have severe emotional instability." Another from a relative. "Everyone's worried about you. Don't push yourself into more stress." Emily was confused. Those weren't her words, not her truth, but they flooded in, like needles pricking her thinning trust. She scrolled down more rumors. About her being unstable, about self-induced pressure leading to the miscarriage. Words Nathan had never said directly to her, but clearly planted by someone with intent. Emily set the phone down. Her whole body trembled, not from pain, but from the sensation of being pushed into a pit she had never seen. She hadn't just lost her child, she was losing her own voice. As she closed her eyes, an image flashed. Nathan standing in the shadows behind the door, calmly watching everything unfold as planned. And in that moment, Emily knew a plan was in motion, and the miscarriage was just the first piece. The next piece would leave her no way back. Dear viewers, take a moment to hit subscribe to the channel before watching the next part of the story, but only if you truly empathize with what I'm sharing here. And leave a comment below to let me know where you're watching from and what time it is now. It's fascinating to see everyone from all over joining us. Snow fell in thick patches, sliding across the windshield as Mark's old SUV barreled through the winding mountain pass. The headlights sliced a narrow beam into the night, while the darkness ahead loomed dense like a vast fabric slowly closing in. The engine hummed steadily, but his mind did not. Emily's message short, trembling still twisted in his chest like an open wound. "Brother, I need you. I'm scared." Mark had heard many cries for help in his years as a cop, but none had chilled his spine like this. He had witnessed all kinds of people, manipulators, abusers who knew how to hide their tracks, women so desperate they no longer trusted their own voices. This time, it was all crashing down on his little sister. When the Aspen Hospital finally came into view, a thin mist clung to the roof like winter's breath. Mark pulled into the lot, stepping out with hurried strides. The cold sliced into his skin, but he didn't bother pulling his coat tighter. He just wanted to reach Emily. The hospital hallway stretched long and overly bright, making everything look like a sterile stage where real emotions were left at the door. When he pushed open Emily's room door, every defensive layer in him nearly crumbled. Emily sat propped against the bed, her face so pale it nearly blended with the white sheets. Beneath her swollen, red eyes lay the deep exhaustion of someone who had endured something that cracked their soul. When she saw him, her tense face shattered instantly. Without a word, she reached out her hand. Mark moved to her, hugging her tightly but gently enough not to hurt. Her breath shuddered with choked sobs. For a few seconds, the room held only the breathing of the siblings, silent but agonizing. When she calmed, Mark sat beside the bed. Emily recounted everything: the snowy night, the wrenching pain, the fall, Nathan's delay, the shock of waking to the divorce papers placed on her lap while the blood hadn't even dried. No exaggeration, no dramatization, just raw truth that made Mark clench his fists to stay calm. Her phone lit up mid-story, showing another notification. Mark glimpsed the messages from acquaintances about Emily's unstable mental state. His lips pressed into a thin line. Rumors. Twisted fragments of story. The familiar tactics of someone turning victim into perpetrator. In a moment of silence, Emily looked down at her hands, her voice faint as a whisper. "He's telling my story for me." Mark didn't answer right away. He stood and walked to the window. Outside, snow fell quietly, each flake touching the glass then melting into droplets. A peaceful night, but inside, a storm was brewing. When he turned back, his voice dropped low, firm as steel. "I believe you, and I'll find out what he's hiding." Emily nodded faintly, her eyes misty but no longer completely broken. Mark's presence solid, steadfast like an anchor, keeping her from drifting into the dark. As she drifted off, Mark quietly left the room. He walked the hallway with steady steps, but inside, a sharp resolve was forming. He knew Nathan's type. Perfect facade, persuasive words, and darkness lurking behind polished gestures. But he also knew something else. Men like that always left traces. And tonight, in Nathan's snow-covered house, something was surely waiting to be found. All right, dear viewers of mine, if you're watching and find this story intriguing, please comment the number 1, or comment, "I'm still here to keep listening," okay? Night winds swept through the tall pines, creating a rustling murmur, like the whispers of a forest hiding secrets. The Hayes family home appeared at the end of the snow-lined road, looking like a peaceful winter painting to an outsider. But to Mark, each dimly lit window was like watchful animal eyes. He killed the headlights from afar, letting the darkness embrace him before approaching. Not because he wanted secrecy, but because he knew Nathan's type turned everything to their advantage. Tonight, Mark needed to enter that territory without a sound. The front door lock felt warm in his hand, as if recently replaced, a quiet sign of preparation. He turned it open with a soft twist. Something an outsider couldn't know came from years of experience. The house inside was clean to a harsh degree. Not the tidiness of an organized person, but the cleanliness of someone who had just erased footprints. A faint scent of disinfectant mingled with expensive cologne, a scent too sharp, too potent, not belonging to Emily. The kitchen lights spilled a pale golden glow onto the mirror-shine countertops. Mark stepped over, placing his hand on the stone surface. Ice cold. No fingerprints. Nothing at all. But perfection always left voids. He knelt, peering along the base of the cabinets. A faint streak, very thin, ran diagonally across the floor like a half-wiped skid mark. Right at the spot, Emily said she had collapsed. Mark brushed his finger lightly. No dust left, but a small indentation, a mark from a panicked heel. And right beside it, a sharp scratch like the impact of something hard. He rose and moved deeper into the living room. Everything arranged flawlessly, too flawlessly. Picture frames, sofa, bookshelves, all in precise positions, unnaturally so, like a stage reset after a chaotic act. While tracing the wall seams, Mark spotted an odd gap between the cabinet and the wall. He leaned down. The thin flashlight beam illuminated a tiny object wedged behind the cabinet leg. A black device, no larger than 2 fingers, its casing cracked. A green LED blinked faintly when he picked it up. A mini camera. Someone had tried to destroy it but hadn't finished. If Emily never knew about it, it meant Nathan installed it to surveil. But why smash it? And right after the tragedy, Mark gripped the camera, his heart pounding. His experience told him that things seeming useless often held the truth the perpetrator feared most. He pocketed the camera and headed straight upstairs. Nathan's study was at the end of the hall, door ajar, pale blue light from the computer screen still spilling out. Mark entered and immediately noticed the file cabinet slightly open. Inside, documents neatly filed except for a glaring gap in the middle. The missing files formed an obvious empty frame. Not marriage papers, not personal documents. These were corporate financial records. And the missing section pertained to a project Mark didn't recognize. Frontridge Consortium. He opened the still-warm laptop. Password suspiciously simple. Accessing internal email revealed a chain. International transactions, transfers to hidden accounts, phrases like, "clear the path," "back door," and one thread as thin as a filament, "clean up anything related to her before questions arise." Mark's heart clenched. Not just a toxic marriage. Not just one tragic night. Nathan was tied to an underground financial ring. and Emily, as joint owner of some assets, had unwittingly brushed against that ring. A small noise from downstairs, faint but distinct, like a door easing open. Mark killed the screen, standing still, hand on the mini camera in his pocket. Not the wind, not the house settling in the cold. Someone had just entered. The sound from downstairs echoed again, soft, intermittent, like careful shoe soles placed to avoid notice. Mark froze in the shadows of the study, his breathing slowing to the instinct of someone versed in life or death situations. He listened, dissecting every tone. This wasn't the house creaking, nor wind slipping through cracks. This was a person. He backed a step into the shadowed corner between the bookshelves and window, where darkness stretched thick. Downstairs, a light flicked on. Yellow, cold, and not his. Mark felt his pulse steady, as if his body knew. One small slip, and the truth in his grasp would be buried again. Footsteps moved around the living room, slow, probing, as if the intruder was searching for something, or ensuring what they had hidden was still intact. A light bump sounded, likely the cabinet where Mark found the camera. He gripped his backpack strap, kept his breath low, and watched. The figure appeared at the end of the hall. Tall, dark coat, head slightly bowed as if scanning the floor. Not Nathan. Different gait. Colder, more professional. A cleaner sent to tidy up. The figure approached the stairs. Mark decided not to be cornered. He retreated a few more steps, his hand brushing the underside of the desk and finding a familiar object, a heavy metal lamp base. He seized it, holding firm. He didn't want violence, but he knew sometimes, to survive, silence had to be guarded with speed. Footsteps ascended the stairs, wood groaning softly with each step. As the figure crested the landing, Mark slipped behind the study door, pressing into the dark corner. The flashlight beam swept the hall, grazing a thin dust trail, then pausing right at the study door. Mark heard gloved hands grip the knob. A soft motion, a breath held. The door cracked open. White light swept into the room. The intruder stepped half in, tilting his head to check, but he didn't venture deeper, perhaps thinking the room too pristine. Or unaware, Mark stood mere feet away, knuckles white on the lamp base. The intruder backed out, the beam slowly shifting to the landing area. Mark heard drawers below being opened, closed, then papers rustling. The sounds unhurried, methodical, from someone who knew exactly what to seek. When the figure descended to the first floor, Mark moved. No running, no noise. He edged along the hallway wall, descending the stairs on the outer edges of the steps to minimize creaks. Below, the flashlight wavered through the kitchen, then clicked off. The person was heading for the back door. An opening. Mark slipped silently to the front door, easing out just as the figure exited through the back. Cold wind slapped his face, but it sharpened his mind. He ducked behind the parked SUV on the curb, watching the shadow cross the backyard and vanish into the pines. No plates, no identifiers, but the movement, decisive, controlled, said it all. This wasn't a colleague of Nathan's. This was a link in something larger, where the email about cleaning up anything related to her was just the first warning. Mark hurried from the yard, the mini camera bouncing lightly in his pocket with each step. He didn't know if it held anything salvageable, but one fragment of truth could turn everything. As he started the engine, snow began falling harder, sheets like white curtains obscuring traces. The motor hummed, but he sat still for seconds, gazing back at the house sinking into darkness. One thing clear, Nathan wasn't hiding it all alone, and the one just inside hadn't come to help him but to erase whatever remained. Are you still here, dear viewers of mine? Pause for a relaxing moment, maybe grab a glass of water, then listen to the captivating content ahead. Comment the number 1 if you find this story intriguing. Don't forget to hit subscribe to the channel. Okay. Denver lay under a thin veil of fog as Mark pulled the SUV into the alley behind the old brick building. Tall windows reflected smeared golden lights, while cold rose from the ground like the breath of a sleepless city. He clutched the mini camera in his coat pocket. It was so small it seemed meaningless, but he knew. The biggest secrets often hid in things that tiny. The metal door swung open after 2 short knocks. The middle-aged man with silver hair and sharp eyes sized up Mark for a beat before nodding him in. Henry Lawson's digital forensics lab brimmed with blue glows from flickering screens. Cables snaked like roots across tabletops. Mark set the device on the table, his eyes unable to hide the tension. Henry turned the camera in his hands, assessing each crack, each scratch, like reading a map. "Someone tried to wipe it clean," he murmured. "But the hasty ones always miss something." Mark crossed his arms, standing by the window, gazing down the dark alley outside. Every minute was another minute. Emily stayed in danger. He heard Henry's work, soft clicks, steady hum of server fans, software booting. The sounds blended into a tense rhythm. Time dripped by. Then suddenly, Henry exhaled softly, enough for Mark to whip around. On the large screen, grainy frames emerged, gray, blurry, shaky. Then slowly, the image stabilized. 2 figures in the living room. Emily's form hunched, hand on belly. Nathan's taller, leaning in, arms rigid like forcing. Then a sharp yank, a stumbling retreat, a gasp. The footage cut, but enough to lodge in the viewer's heart. Proof. No doubt left. Mark dug his nails into his palms to quell the rising fury. No dialogue needed, no explanation. That moment in the video, too real, too clear to dispute, was what Emily never had, and what Nathan never dreamed would be recovered. Henry exported a copy to USB, then 2 more to backup drives. "Keep this in 3 different places," he said. "If someone tried erasing it once, they won't mind trying twice." Mark nodded, tucking the USB into his coat's inner pocket, feeling like he held a living weapon. He straightened, meeting Henry's eyes with quiet gratitude. "I won't let this sink," he said softly, but his tone sharp enough to cut the air. Stepping out, night wind lashed his face, but this time, he felt no cold. He felt clear, awake. The pieces were aligning in a terrifying way. Not just abuse, not just neglect, not just manipulating the victim's voice. Emily's fall was a cover for something else. What Nathan hid in shadow accounts, what made him panic enough to smash the camera, spread tales of her instability, pull in a crew to scrub traces. Mark drove straight to Aspen Hospital. When he entered her room, Emily leaned against pillows, eyes weary but brighter than in days past. She saw the sharp edge on his face and knew something had shifted. Without many words, Mark placed the USB on the small bedside table. Emily stared at it like her torn heart pieced back together. Henry called minutes later, voice low and real. "The video has one more thing. Not Emily's audio, but another man's voice in the house. A third party. Clearly not Nathan." Mark froze. A third party. Not Nathan. Not Emily. Another shadow had been there that night. A thin mist slid across the tall panes of the federal courthouse as morning broke. Denver's air bit cold, but inside the courtroom, the tension cut sharper than any wind. Dark wooden benches filled early, eyes converging on one point, a confrontation they knew went beyond a broken marriage. Deeper, darker, as if something larger waited to be peeled back in that space. Emily sat ramrod straight at the plaintiff's table, hands on her lap. Though her face still carried the weariness of long days, something else flickered a resolve. Mark stood beside her, eyes scanning every motion in the room. And at the prosecution table, Nora Hayes bent over her thick file like a sword ready to unsheath. In the first minutes, Nathan was let in. The expensive suit no longer hid his depletion. He ducked his head, striding quickly, shoulders hunched as if dodging piercing stares from all sides. Gone was the glossy confidence of the CEO smiling from press podiums. Today, only the tremor of a man knowing exposure loomed. As the trial began, Nora laid out the events in a steady, low voice. She didn't embellish, didn't build to crescendos, just facts layer by layer, cold as ice. First evidence, the video. When the blurry frames hit the large screen, the courtroom held its breath. The image lasted 3 seconds, but enough to make viewers bow their heads. The sharp yank, the painful stagger, the choked groan, all replaying Emily's loss of balance. Truth needed no elaboration. Nathan gripped the table edge, head bowed low. But after the video, Nora pressed on. She approached the bench, placing another file, the emails Mark uncovered, hidden in Nathan's computer. Threads on cross-border transfers, shell companies for cover, vague but pointed directives. Clean up, ensure she doesn't interfere, no more slip-ups. Silence spread through the courtroom. No one thought this mere domestic abuse anymore. One juror hunched forward, as if grappling with the scope before them. Nathan clawed the table edge, neck veins bulging. For a moment, he nearly bolted up, but his lawyer's warning slumped him back. Then the witnesses. When Sabrina took the stand, the courtroom nearly pivoted with her. Her face pale, but her eyes held a resolve she hadn't known she possessed. She confessed her part, the messages, her role in spreading the Emily unstable narrative. Each word pierced Nathan's mask, tearing what he had built. But more crucially, she named the figure appearing for the first time in the files. Danton Rowe. A name that snapped Mark's head up. A near-anonymous figure in finance, yet owning shellcore across Arizona and Nevada. A man who never faced the public. A shadow more than a person. Sabrina said he met Nathan repeatedly, discussing cash flows, partnerships, and leak risks. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Nora kept her voice even, but her eyes gleamed sharp. She had waited for this key. And as she placed the buried financial report on the bench, the courtroom seemed to spin on a new axis, not Nathan anymore. Not Emily's tragedy, but a sophisticated money laundering web operating under clean business shells. Nathan lost composure. He surged up, shouting, "Sabrina lied, Emily fabricated, everything staged." His words echoed, stark, meaningless. Federal agents moved before the judge ordered. Cold cuffs snapped on his wrists. The metal clicked like a final period. But Emily didn't look at Nathan. She looked at Nora, then Mark. A quiet but chilling thought. If Nathan was just a pawn, the one moving the board was still out there, free, watching. As she left the courtroom, Mark's phone buzzed in his pocket. Unknown number. One short message. "You touched what you shouldn't. Stop." Mark halted. A cold draft swept the courthouse hall. Afternoon in Denver faded into pale golden light, draping the long streets with a sense the world exhaled after the storm. Emily walked slowly through the courthouse hall, her slight shoulders firmer than ever. Today brought no full victory. Nothing could replace the child she lost, but it brought truth. And truth, however brutal, was the first thing to pull a person from the dark. Mark walked beside her. His heavy steps, those of a man realizing the battle they thought ended, had only opened a deeper door. The name Danton Rowe hung like an unseen threat, a shadow no one had faced, yet pulling strings from behind. Emily sensed it clearly. Nathan was surface ripples. Beneath the water, a full tide waiting to rise. But right then, the only thing she felt was the warm breeze brushing her face, and the sensation of finally standing tall again. She had survived the man who once sought to destroy her. She had dared to speak back in her own voice. And she knew countless women out there waited for that moment in their lives. Emily's story wasn't just escaping a toxic relationship, but reclaiming her worth, her voice, her truth. No one had the right to steal. And this was just the beginning. If you want to see Emily, Mark, and Nora confront the force behind Nathan, leave a comment, share your thoughts, and let us know if you're ready for part 2 of this story. The real storm is still ahead.